September 12, 1958, 11:47 p.m. A man stood 6 feet behind Harlem's most powerful gangster. The gun was loaded, the room was full, and the trigger was about to be pulled at point-blank range. But when the shot came, it didn't fire. Just a single click echoed through the room. That one sound didn't just save a life. It shifted the balance of power in Harlem forever. Because the man holding the gun wasn't an enemy. He wasn't a rival. He wasn't an outsider. He was Bumpy Johnson's own bodyguard. And what happened next is something history books never tell you. The Lennox Lounge was alive that night. Jazz floated through the room, smooth and unhurried, the kind of music that made people forget where they were. Cigarette smoke hung low under the lights, mixing with laughter, whispered deals, and the clink of glasses. It was a full house, packed wall to wall with musicians, hustlers, politicians, and men who controlled things quietly. Friday night in Harlem always felt untouchable, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner table, relaxed, comfortable, a grey suit pressed perfectly, fedora resting beside his glass. His back was turned to the room, his attention locked on conversation and cognac. He looked untouchable because he believed he was, and for years he had every reason to believe that. Behind him, moving through the crowd like he'd done 1,000 times before, was Big Sam. No one paid attention, no one questioned it. Sam was always there, 6'4", broad shoulders, calm eyes. The man trusted to stand closest to Bumpy Johnson. The man paid to make sure no one ever got too close. Sam stopped 6 feet behind the chair. The jazz band kept playing. The room kept breathing. Inside his jacket, his hand closed around cold metal. His pulse pounded in his ears, louder than the music. Every step he took had already been rehearsed in his mind 100 times. Bumpy leaned forward slightly, distracted, vulnerable, just for a moment. That was all Sam needed. He drew the gun slowly, carefully, making sure nothing rattled, nothing caught attention. Time stretched thin. The room didn't know what was about to happen. Sam aimed, pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was wrong. Too small. Too empty. No explosion. No chaos. Just a hollow click cutting straight through the music. The jazz stopped mid-note. Glasses froze halfway to mouths. Every conversation died in the same breath. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't jump, didn't reach for anything. He calmly lifted his glass, took one slow sip, then set it down. Only then did he turn his chair around. His eyes met Sam's, not angry, not shocked, just steady, knowing. I've been counting on you. In 1958, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another gangster in a nice suit. He was a symbol. To the outside world, he was a criminal. To Harlem, he was protection. The thin line standing between the neighborhood and the men who wanted to strip it bare. When outsiders came looking to take, Bumpy stood in the way. When trouble followed the community home, he made sure it stopped there. Harlem trusted Bumpy because he lived where they lived. He walked the same streets, ate at the same places, listened to the same music. When families fell behind on rent, landlords didn't knock twice, because Bumpy had already handled it. When a mother cried because her lights were cut off, someone made a call, and the lights came back on. No speeches, no credit taken, just quiet fixes that kept life moving. The money behind all of this came from numbers, small bets, nickels and dimes from people who didn't have much, hoping for one lucky break. Those small bets added up to millions every year. The Italian mob wanted that money badly. They wanted control over every dollar moving through Harlem, but they couldn't take it as long as Bumpy Johnson was standing there. The Italians ruled through fear, broken bones, burned businesses, bodies left behind as warnings. That system worked everywhere else, but it didn't work in Harlem, because Bumpy didn't rule Harlem with fear alone. He ruled it with respect. He knew which doors to knock on and which ones to protect. He knew when to push and when to wait, and most importantly, he knew the people trusted him more than they feared anyone else. When Italian mobsters tried to muscle in, Bumpy pushed back hard, not loud, not sloppy, but decisive. Men who crossed him didn't disappear right away. They learned first, and if they didn't learn, then they vanished. Slow lessons traveled farther than fast violence. By 1958, Harlem wasn't just territory, it was a statement. As long as Bumpy Johnson sat at his table, Harlem belonged to itself. And that's why killing Bumpy mattered, because removing him didn't just mean taking out a man. It meant breaking the spine of an entire community. By the late 1950s, Harlem was a problem the Italian mob couldn't solve. The five families controlled most of New York, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, but Harlem stayed off limits, and every year that passed meant millions slipping through their fingers, money they believed already belonged to them. At the center of that frustration was Bumpy Johnson. Frank Costello saw him as a disruption. Carlo Gambino saw him as a threat, not because Bumpy had more soldiers, but because he had something they couldn't buy: loyalty. Every move the Italians made in Harlem seemed to collapse before it even started. They tried force first. Enforcers were sent north to intimidate bookmakers. Some came back broken. Some didn't come back at all. They tried negotiations, backroom meetings with promises of partnership and percentages. Bumpy shut every door. They tried political pressure, but Bumpy's connections ran just as deep, sometimes deeper. Each failure sent a clearer message. Harlem wasn't like the rest of the city. Fear didn't spread the same way there. Violence didn't produce obedience. It produced resistance. And the five families were losing both money and face. Frank Costello called a private meeting. The room was filled with men who rarely admitted defeat. They laid out the numbers, the losses, the embarrassment. Carlo Gambino listened quietly, then spoke the truth nobody wanted to say. Bumpy Johnson couldn't be removed from the outside. Every attack only made him stronger. That's when the strategy changed. They stopped looking at Harlem and started looking at Bumpy's inner circle, at the men who stood closest, the men who knew his habits, his movements, his blind spots. They couldn't beat Bumpy from the outside, so they went inside, because betrayal was cheaper than war, quieter than gunfire, and far more effective. All they needed was one man desperate enough, one weakness deep enough, and one moment close enough to pull the trigger. Big Sam wasn't always a traitor. For 5 years he had been Bumpy Johnson's shadow. He stood between Bumpy and bullets. He took orders without questions. He took risks without hesitation. Twice he took bullets meant for another man. In Harlem, loyalty like that was rare, and Sam had earned his place the hard way. But loyalty doesn't protect you from real life. Sam went home every night to worry, to unpaid bills, to hospital corridors that smelled like bleach and fear. His youngest daughter was sick. Tuberculosis, the kind of sickness that drained money faster than hope. Doctors talked in careful voices, nurses avoided eye contact, and every visit came with another bill Sam couldn't afford. That's when the offer came. Quiet, clean. A black car pulling up where it didn't belong. A man with a calm smile and expensive shoes speaking softly. No threats at first, just numbers, just possibilities. $50,000, enough to clear every medical bill, enough to move his family somewhere clean, somewhere safe, somewhere his daughter could breathe again. Sam said no at first. He meant it. He believed it. But desperation has a way of wearing down belief, because the offer didn't stop with money. It came with reminders. What happens when the money runs out? What happens when favors end? What happens to sick little girls in charity wards? What happens to loyal men when they're no longer useful? Loyalty doesn't pay hospital bills. That sentence stayed with him, echoed louder than gunfire. Every night he watched his daughter struggle for breath. Every night he thought about the briefcase full of cash. And every morning he stood next to Bumpy Johnson pretending nothing had changed. The choice wasn't simple. It wasn't greed. It was survival. One trigger pull, one moment, and everything could be fixed. Or so they promised. 3 days later, Sam made the call. And in that moment, he didn't feel like a traitor. He felt like a father running out of time. Bumpy Johnson didn't become king of Harlem by trusting blindly. He became king by seeing everything others missed. Eyes on the streets, ears in every corner, people who knew more than they seemed to. Bartenders, shoe shiners, cab drivers, janitors, the kind of people nobody noticed. The kind of people the Italian mob never thought to pay attention to, and one of those people saw Big Sam get into a Cadillac that morning, a parking attendant named Jerome, not important to anyone else, but everything to Bumpy. He wrote down the license plate, remembered every detail, and delivered it straight to Bumpy's office. Bumpy sat back in his chair, looked at the note, and didn't react immediately. He let it sink in, let the pieces move themselves around him. He didn't panic. He didn't call Sam or confront the mob. He had already decided how this would play out. He made a few phone calls to a trusted gunsmith in Brooklyn, a man named Victor who had worked on his firearms for over a decade. Victor was given a precise task: create a gun that looked perfect, felt perfect, but wouldn't fire. A dummy, flawless in weight and balance. While Sam went about his errand across town, Bumpy and his associate slipped into Sam's apartment. They swapped the real gun with Victor's dummy without Sam noticing. Every detail rehearsed, every step timed perfectly. Sam believed he carried a weapon capable of ending Bumpy's life, but in reality he held nothing more than a click waiting to happen. Bumpy didn't stop the hit. He scheduled it. He let Sam walk into Lennox Lounge with the weapon in hand. He let the betrayal unfold exactly as the mob had planned. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite, but to teach a lesson that no one in Harlem or the underworld would ever forget. Because by letting it happen, Bumpy showed that the real power wasn't in guns or money. It was in knowing every move before it was made. And when the moment came, the click would echo louder than any bullet ever could. Sam moved through the crowd at Lennox Lounge like he'd done 1,000 times before, blending in, silent, focused, every step measured, every eye avoided. He carried the .38 Special in his jacket, gripping it tighter with each step. The jazz band played on, unaware that a moment was about to shatter the rhythm of the night. People laughed, glasses clinked, conversations flowed. And then Sam stopped 6 feet behind Bumpy Johnson's chair. He drew the gun slowly, feeling the weight he had carried for 5 years. The metal was familiar, comforting even. The crowd didn't notice yet. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. Every nerve screamed with anticipation. Bumpy remained oblivious, leaning over his glass, speaking to city councilmen. Relaxed and unafraid, Sam's fingers tightened around the trigger. This was it, the payoff. The $50,000 that could save his daughter. Sam aimed, pulled the trigger. Click! The sound was hollow, sharp, and deafening in its emptiness. The jazz band froze mid-note. Glasses trembled in hands. Conversations died instantly. 300 people turned at once to see Big Sam standing with a useless gun, and Bumpy Johnson, calm, sitting as if nothing had happened. His eyes met Sam's slowly, deliberately, filled with something heavier than anger, something colder, disappointment. "I've been counting on you," Bumpy said quietly. The words struck Sam harder than any bullet ever could. The silence of the room pressed down on him like a weight. He sank to his knees, the gun slipping from his hands. Tears filled his eyes, shame mixing with relief. Bumpy reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, dropping it on the table with deliberate care. "You think I don't take care of my people?" Bumpy asked, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lounge. Sam looked inside. Medical bills paid in full, every expense covered, a check for his family included. Everything the mob promised him with betrayal, Bumpy had already given without compromise. Sam's heart twisted, humiliation and gratitude battling in equal measure. The room watched silently as a man who had believed himself powerful, rich, untouchable, realized he had been outplayed. Bumpy Johnson had allowed the ultimate betrayal to unfold, revealing loyalty, weakness, and the true cost of desperation. Sam left that night broken, carrying both shame and the weight of knowing the truth. And the click that should have ended a life instead echoed through Harlem as a lesson no one would ever forget. By morning, word of what happened at Lennox Lounge had spread through every corner of New York's underworld. From Boston to Baltimore, every mobster whispered the same story. The man they had tried to buy, or break, had turned their plan against them without spilling a drop of blood. Frank Costello was furious, slamming fists on tables, searching for answers and accountability. Carlo Gambino, however, saw it differently. He understood what force, money, and betrayal could not achieve in Harlem. Gambino leaned back, lighting a cigar slowly, letting the smoke curl through the tension-filled room. "We can't beat this man," he said quietly. "Every time we move against him, he's already seen it coming. Every time we think we have an opening, he's 10 steps ahead. We leave Harlem alone. It's not ours to take, and anyone who tries will pay far more than they're willing to lose." For the first time in history, the 5 families backed down without firing a shot. Harlem remained untouched, not because of fear alone, but because respect had been earned. Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated a power that no weapon could match. a power born from intelligence, patience, and the ability to turn betrayal into a lesson for everyone watching. That night, the Italian mob learned something dangerous. Bumpy Johnson was always 3 moves ahead, and from that moment on, Harlem belonged to its people, protected by a man who understood that true strength was measured not by guns or money, but by foresight, loyalty, and the ability to play the game while everyone else was still learning the rules. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's not money, it's not even loyalty bought or sold. The most dangerous weapon is knowing what's coming before your enemy does, seeing their plans, their weaknesses, their desperation, and using it to turn their own moves against them. Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive that night at Lennox Lounge. He taught a lesson the underworld would never forget, a lesson about foresight, strategy, and the kind of power that can't be taken by force. Sam left with shame and a lifetime of regret. The mob left with respect and fear that they would never shake, and Harlem stayed intact, protected not by bullets but by a man who understood every angle, every possibility, every human weakness. That's the kind of story that doesn't make the history books, but it shapes the streets, the people, and the legacy of a neighborhood forever. If stories like this hit different for you, hit that like button. Subscribe to Decoding Dark History, because the real stories are darker than fiction. And trust me, the next one is going to show you just how deep the shadows of history really go.